Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this webinar on organizing engagement and Census Bureau partnerships. As you know, Asian Americans Advancing Justice is working to ensure a full and accurate count of our communities in the 2020 census. As the national hub, we're working to develop curriculum and materials to support your Get Out the Count work, including fact sheets, toolkits, webinars, social media graphics, translated materials, and more. Today, we're excited to dive deeper into Get Out the Count campaigns and best practices and resources for outreach and communications. As you may know, this webinar is the 11th installment of our monthly census webinar series, which we launched in August of 2018. If you missed our previous webinars and want to tune in, you can access them with the links on this slide. Our next webinar is taking place next month in September. Also, please be sure to check out our census website at www.countusin2020.org. The website includes summary blogs and videos for each of our webinars, and you can also find latest news, press releases, partner resources, and more. We recently released 10 new Get Out the Count fact sheets. They cover topics such as the census timeline, questions on the census form, and other information about what the census is, how to participate, and how to get assistance. There are fact sheets for community member audiences and also more comprehensive fact sheets for community-based organizations to use. We also have 2 more Get Out the Count fact sheets planned to cover the internet response option and non-response follow-up. Our Get Out the Count fact sheets will be translated. There are 23 translations planned, and we're also working in partnership with Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, or EPIC, to produce and tailor a set of fact sheets focused on the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community. We also recently released our Community Engagement and Communications Toolkit. The toolkit includes tips for Get Out the Count campaigns and a deeper dive into messages that resonate best with AA and HPI communities. Our speakers will highlight some of the toolkit content today. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to our speakers who are joining us from Asian Americans Advancing Justice affiliates in Atlanta, Chicago, and Los Angeles. We'll be covering Census Bureau outreach and partnerships, Getting Out the Count in your community, census messaging and communication, and we'll also have Q&A. We will have Q&A at the end of this webinar, and you can either use the chat box or questions box to send your questions, or you can raise your hand to have your line unmuted so you can ask the question yourself. If you have questions during the presentation, please also use the chat box or questions box to send us your questions. And I'll repeat these instructions once we get to Q&A as well. This webinar is recorded, and we will send out the recording and a copy of the presentation after the webinar. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Anne with Advancing Justice Los Angeles.
Thank you, Bessie. So again, my name is Anne Le. I'm with Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles, and I will be speaking about Census Bureau outreach and partnerships. So I'm going to start off with going over some facts and figures from the 2010 census. So if you can change the slide, please. So the results from the 2010 census indicated that there was no significant percent net undercount, but there were actually undercounts when you look at specific communities. And I will say that, just as a note, that the data on Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander undercounts were not statistically significant, so I'm not going to share that here. But we do know is that a lot of our community members are also renters, and a lot of them have young children. And so in 2010, there was an undercount of renters by 1.1%. And that is in comparison to the 0.57 net overcount for homeowners. And young children from 0 to 4 were undercounted by almost 1 million, which is pretty significant and resulted in a loss of significant funding for a lot of our communities. So the next slide will indicate why, and also here is the percent net undercount for persons by state. And this is something that came out after the Census 2010 results. So these are results that were estimates that were released in 2012. So you can see that a lot of these states, a lot of the states where there are significant immigrant populations experience undercounts in 2010. So I will point out that the largest undercount was actually in the District of Columbia at 2.23. And I will also note that Texas had an undercount of 0.97 and California had an undercount of 0.26. So those are pretty sizable undercounts, especially given the number of immigrant populations in those states. So the next slide will show the new sets of challenges and barriers that we face for the 2020 census. So though the information that the previous map showed that where the states had undercounts, but the conditions are going to be different for 2020. Primarily, those differences will be this transition of the census to an online format, which will likely impact participation among those who lack internet access and/or literacy. Another area where we will face some challenges is that the Census Bureau will no longer be funding questionnaire assistance centers. So this is a decision that they've made in an attempt to reduce costs, but we do know that the QACs were instrumental in providing assistance for our community members to fill out their forms. So this will be a big hit. And in addition to that, or finally, there will be significant language barriers because the printed forms will only be available in English and Spanish. And so we know that that's going to hit our communities pretty hard given the number of limited English proficiency among our immigrant communities. So I know that this sounds dire, but this is where community organizations, local and state governments, and other stakeholders can step up and take action. So in the next slide, we will see what you can do about this and what organizations can do. So part of this is that we want to help develop, we want organizations to develop an outreach and education plan to spread the message and the importance of the census, and two, to let community members know where they can get language assistance. So organizations can become Census Bureau partners and share resources developed by the Bureau. The Census Bureau has developed materials, tools, and resources for partners to share with their communities. The materials range from basic 101 information about the census to more audience-specific fact sheets and resources for community organizations, businesses, schools, foundations, and faith-based organizations. The goal is to reach hard-to-count populations at the grassroots level. So the partnership program includes planning activities to reach the hard-to-count through various initiatives like complete count committees at various levels of government, as well as focused outreach to the various hard-to-count populations. So you can actually find out more about this program by clicking on this link that I've provided on this page. And the next slide will indicate or show so that there are other components of the partnership program that will also be put in place to assist our community members. So one way of doing that is that the Census Bureau will have telephone questionnaire assistance. So people can call in various languages and get assistance in actually filling out the form on the spot. The Census Bureau will also be initiating a new program to make up for the loss of the questionnaire assistance centers called Mobile Response Initiative. So basically, this involves providing staff with tablets or computers to help people answer the forms at high traffic venues. So there have been some concerns about this program because of and a concern specifically around whether this initiative will be staffed well enough to provide the assistance that our folks will need. So one way to provide some filling of this gap or this potential gap is for organizations to host or help set up questionnaire assistance centers. So organizations that already provide critical social services for their communities are pretty well set up for this. And alternatively, you can work with your local governments or stakeholders to prepare your local libraries, county offices, or community clinics to host a QAC. So basically, anywhere where you expect that there will be a high traffic of hard-to-count communities coming through your doors really is a really great opportunity to think creatively about the ways that you can support our communities in getting an accurate count. So you can actually learn more from the toolkit that that Asian Americans Advancing Justice has provided, and what Bessie has referenced. So that is it for my piece. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Hi, everyone. This is, again, Karuna Ramachandran from Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. And we're going to talk a little bit about Get Out the Count, or GOTC. Next slide. So we are roughly 8 months away from Census Day 2020. That's April 1st, 2020. And for those of you on the call who are community advocates and who are doing work in community, that's not much time. So we have our work cut out for us to get out the count. Let's take a look really quick at the DOTC timeline. So right now in 2019, we like to call this the community education and dialogue phase. This is the time right now before 2020 to have conversations with community. And that's because, in January to March of 2020, you're going to see a lot of ads and heightened awareness happen in community. And so for our communities to understand and have context for that marketing and media, it's really important to have education and conversations now. In March to May of 2020, our job is to ensure that the community participates in the survey, because that's when they're going to start receiving invitations to their households, and they're going to get several reminders to participate as well. And then after that, May to July of 2020, we have the enumerator program, which is where Census Bureau staff will go knocking on doors to make sure that the surveys are completed. And there are ways for our communities to be involved in that process too. And so we're going to get to that as well. Next slide. So one of the strategies that we talk about mostly when we think about GOTC is the Complete Count Committee, or CCC. Joining or forming a Complete Count Committee is an excellent way to make sure that you have a coordinated and consolidated strategy for GOTC, and that you're using all of your resources wisely as the months go on. But I just want to point out here that not every community organization or group will have the capacity to form a Complete Count Committee or join a Complete Count Committee even. So also think about, as we go through the slide, but these are also roles of just census advocates or community advocates. So let's go through these. One of the key roles of a Complete Count Committee or a census advocate is to hold space for dialogue. And we talk about how important that is to have dialogue right now in 2019. And Anne talked a lot about the challenges. And of course, we know that our communities have a lot of trust issues. They have concerns, they have questions, and sometimes they're really confused about what's going on. So it's really important to have dialogue, ask the questions, allow them to ask questions, and kind of work through some of their concerns, right? So another role is to educate about the changes to be expected. And that's really important because a lot of our community was here in 2010. And so those changes that Anne just went through are really important to talk about now so that folks feel super prepared to participate. And then of course, the Complete Count Committee, or as advocates, you can participate in marketing. You can go out and tell people about the benefits of census and the benefits of participating. And you can talk about census in how it's a power building opportunity for our communities, and even share what your choices are to participate. And that really helps move community to participate in the survey. And then finally, as advocates and Complete Count Committees, we want to be a part of, shaping the narrative around census, because so much of what our communities are hearing has been dominated by negativity and fear, especially around the citizenship question. And we have communities who are really confused and sort of overwhelmed by that still. And so what we want to do as advocates is really use every opportunity we have to shape the narrative around census and say, hey, this is an opportunity for our communities to build power. If we're counted, we have power, we get to have a say, and our communities get to grow and have sustainability moving forward. Next slide. So that's a lot of work. And what I want to say is you definitely cannot do it alone. In order to have a program to get out the count, it takes a team. And right here you see our beautiful Asian American Complete Count Committee here in Georgia, which we formed to bring support to our leaders here in this picture who are really invested in getting out the count. But they can't do it alone. We need each other. We need to share resources. We need to leverage each other's knowledge and passion around this topic in order to move forward. And so if you're really interested in becoming a census advocate or forming a Complete Count Committee, just keep in mind that you can't do it alone, and it's really important to form a team, even if it's just you and one other person to start out with. Form a team early on. Next slide. And then as a team, there are certain really strategic activities that you can participate in to help our Asian American Pacific Islander communities participate in census. And one of those is really about, as you get that team together, you want to make sure that your team members, those leaders who have a voice in community, are trained about census, that they understand the mechanics of census and the importance of census and even the timeline of it, right? Because ultimately they're the ones who are going to be answering a lot of questions about census, and the way that they talk about it is going to affect what we say is like the narrative around census for that community. So train your team, and went through ways to partner with your local Census Bureau partners, and that's a really great way to tap into an existing resource. Have your partnership specialists come out and meet your team, provide a training, offer what resources they can, so that folks are really educated and prepared to have those conversations with community members. Of course, you want to make sure that you're assessing any gaps in those memberships, and this happens all the time, where we have the dedicated groups of community members who always turn out in order to support community. And, not everybody in our community has capacity to do everything, but there are folks who can do a small part in this whole process. So think outside of the box. We often work with, if you're involved in civic engagement or organizing work, you have your community partners who are already active, but census is something that really affects everybody. It affects parents, it affects teachers, it affects faith leaders, it affects professionals as well. So think outside of the box and invite them to have these conversations and to join your team. And then, of course, you want to develop a coordinated outreach calendar or plan with your team. Here pictured, we have our Korean Complete Count Committee here in Georgia. And in that group right there, you have folks who are working in North Georgia, who are working in Atlanta, who are working in Southeast Georgia, right? And so they have a lot of reach within their specific areas. They also have a lot of overlap when it comes to Georgia's Korean community. And so part of their work is really about developing a coordinated outreach strategy so that we're really maximizing our resources here. Of course, multilingual marketing and our Advancing Justice affiliation will have a ton of multilingual resources for you to use on our website. So we really invite you to utilize that, but keep in mind that you as community leaders who do in language work, who are part of the community, you have yourself and you have social media and you have in language resources to push out at events, with your ethnic media, again, using social media. Facebook Live goes a really long way here in Georgia. And of course, you have those leaders who have the passion and the time who can be available to speak about census. And you can train them and be ready to talk about census and kind of form this speakers bureau that will go to events and sort of grab the mic and talk about census every opportunity they get, or even talk to media or be at specific events and have conversations there. So that's another way to participate in marketing census. And then, of course, as we get closer to March, when the forms are actually going to be either going to the households or folks will be invited to participate online, it's going to be really important for us to have some kind of strategy to assist community members to complete the form. And Anne did touch on some of those as well, which is to partner with your local Census Bureau partners and let them know where folks can be reached in high doses, and so that they have a really high touch with their mobile iPads. And they can come to your community centers, they can come to your churches, really take advantage of that opportunity. But you can also utilize your own spaces to assist in completing the form. And here in Georgia, we're creating a website where our community members can go onto the website and actually find a location where they can gain assistance in language to complete the census form. And that's not going to be everybody's capacity. Maybe you would have a list of resources available to to community members, you can use social media to push that out. You can post it on bulletin boards. You can announce it at churches or temples, or at events again. So having some kind of strategy to assist community members and letting them know that they can get assistance from you and the Census Bureau is really important. Again, I won't talk too much about it because Anne did a great job letting you know all the different ways you can connect to the Census Bureau staff. But keeping in mind that at the state, county, and local levels, complete count committees are being formed. And in many cases, here in Georgia, for example, complete count committees are being formed in cities where we have really high rates of growth for Asian American communities, and yet we don't see that participation from our communities. And so a big push for us is to make sure that we have our community leaders and community advocates participate on the local level, and of course at the county and state level as well. So being a part of those complete count committees can be very influential in how they, if they have a budget, utilize those resources and spread them out to include the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And then finally, you want to create opportunities for community members to get hired. And there's multiple job offerings with the Census Bureau. And this is another great reason to become a partner with the Census Bureau, connect with your local office, and you can have a hiring specialist come out to your meetings or to events and share all of the different opportunities that community members have. And how wonderful would that be, especially for the enumerator program, if we had, for example, Korean-speaking community members who are knocking on the door to help those communities and families complete their census form. That would be wonderful. And so our job as advocates is really to advertise those opportunities to our community members and make sure that they are, getting in now while they can. So those are some of the strategic activities that you can do as a team or as a census advocate. And just keep in mind that at whatever level capacity you have, anything helps, everything helps. All of us coming together and getting out the count is going to be very important in this short amount of time that we have. And now I'll pass it on to Brandon from Chicago.
I am now unmuted. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking some time to join us this afternoon. My name is Brandon Lee, I'm Communications Coordinator here at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. A fun fact about me is that my very first job out of college was with Advancing Justice right here in Chicago as a community organizing associate doing, that's right, outreach for the 2010 census. So this is my second rodeo with the decennial count, and I'm ready to help move our communities towards our big goal, which is, between now and April, to make sure our community members fill out and participate in the 2020 US Census and that we have a complete count. An essential part of that work is ensuring that we know how to talk about the census. And today we're going to talk about how we talk about the census and also talk about two of the ways that we get the word out through news outlets, which is earned media, and as well as directly to our audiences through social media. So some quick background to start. Last September, Advancing Justice ran a series of focus groups and conducted an online survey to learn more about what Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities across the country knew about the census and what would motivate them to participate. And this is guiding how we talk about the census with our communities. Now, it's almost a year ago now, last September, but at that point, over half of Asian American community members did not know anything about the census and had not heard that it was going to happen. So hopefully in the year since then, we've made some headway in making sure more people know about the census. But as we talk to them, these are the messages that we are putting forward. Family is something that resonates with our communities in a huge way. Census data is critical to our family's future and to the next generation. Also, underneath that is a focus on children in particular. Census data is critical to our children's future and the next generation. And this has the connections to healthcare, to transportation, schools, affordable housing, and higher education that our children need to get a good start in life and to be successful. Also resonant with our communities is resources. Census data is used to determine not only federal government funding for federal funding for programs and services, also businesses use it to decide where to invest. And also that the census has helped our communities in the past. 2010 census showed that in one major city, Asian American community has doubled in the previous 10 years, and this has led to significant increases in federal dollars for schools. And I think the important thing about that is also that it ties to the visibility of our community, which is another message that resonates with our community, even if it's not one of the top 4. Now, I want to emphasize again that this is overall among Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities in the US. These messages might resonate more or possibly less with your communities based on the audience, the specific audience that you're trying to reach, as well as the region that you're in. There are more results and more specific messages and themes that can be found in the Countism 2020 Toolkit that's available at countism2020.org. So now that you know some of the things to say about the census, let's talk about a couple of the ways that you can get the message out. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so one of the ways to get the message out about the census is through earned media. So that would be the press. And Advancing Justice's research has shown that 68% of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community members find English language traditional media to be a reliable source of information. Additionally, 49% of community members find in-language ethnic media to be a reliable source. And this means a majority of our community members will trust the media if we're able to get our message out. So this could be through it could be through national outlets like Washington Post or NPR, New York Times. You could also see this through local outlets like the Houston Chronicle or Chicago Tribune. It could be something more hyper-local, like something in your neighborhood base, or it could also mean in-language ethnic media. Can you go to the next slide, please? So here are some big takeaways for working with media. First thing is know your audience. That means knowing the outlets that they read and the websites that they visit. This is going to guide you in knowing which outlets and which reporters to go to when you are trying to get the word out about the census. You also need to have an angle that's relevant to the audience and the outlet. So we talk a lot about how the census accounts for billions and billions of dollars in federal funding, and this is absolutely true. But the best way to make it relevant for your communities is to find the smaller number, something more specific for your community area that is going to feel more real, basically, to the audience that you're trying to reach. And there are many different ways to engage with that media outlet and to get your story in the outlet so that it makes it to your audience. So you could be making proactive story pitches. You could be writing an op-ed or submitting a letter to the editor based on something that was previously written in the paper. You could send around a booking memo that is basically a short description of an expert and or directly affected community member that is available, that is sent out to media outlets in your area. It could be a drop-in article. That is an article that you write yourself and is submitted to usually smaller, more local papers that don't always have journalists covering a beat. And you could also run a public service announcement. This is often run in conjunction with local outlets that offer time to community groups to talk about the issues that are facing their communities. And in general, it's important to think a little creatively here. Now, that usually usually takes form within the pitch, and so you want to approach the issue of the census a little differently, and sorry, I lost my place. Approach the issue of the census a little differently, and try to think outside the box if you can. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, and another way to get the word out about the 2020 census is directly to your audience through social media. This is an increasingly important way to get information to our communities, and also from the Advancing Justice survey that took place last September, family members are among the most trusted sources for our community, and as families are increasingly on social media, this is one of the ways that family members end up sharing information with each other. So let's talk real quick about some social media and the 2020 census. Next slide. So big takeaways, there's Karuna up there. Know which platforms are used by your audience. So if your audience is on Facebook, make sure that that is where you're putting some of your energy. If you notice that your audience is growing on Instagram, then it is a good time to dedicate some more time to further growing it on that platform. Each social media platform has ways of measuring the audience and measuring your engagement, so make sure that you are keeping track of that. You want to keep your posts short and sweet, get to the message right away, while also utilizing video, photos, and shareable images, because those are the eye-catching things that people will see as they're scrolling through their feed. We've all been mindlessly scrolling through our feeds, and what is it that catches our eye? It is the photos, it is the images, it's the video that make us stop for a minute. If you get any earned media from the last section, definitely share it on social. That is a way to take something with the credibility of a media outlet and then share it directly with your audience. When you're doing that, make sure to tag your partners, tag journalists, tag the news outlets that wrote about you, and measure your success as you're going. Know that the message and the content that you're putting out there is reaching the audiences that you want it to reach. Real quick, for each of these platforms, a quick top line takeaway: Facebook, vary your content. Don't only post links or don't only post photos. Mix it up between them. For Twitter, make sure you're organizing Twitter storms. So Advancing Justice throughout the census might be organizing some Twitter storms down the line, but you could organize one for your local community or for your state. And it's important to make sure it's organized ahead of time and that materials are put together. And then for Instagram, Stories is one of the fastest growing platforms, or fastest growing ways that Instagram is being used. So make sure you're using that function to educate your audience. The final slide here is a reminder that the full census toolkit is on our website, countusin2020.org, and each one of these platforms has a little bit more depth to it in here, and I would definitely recommend checking that out. So thanks to everyone. That's all from me.
Thank you, Anne, Karuna, and Brandon. So we are going to get started with Q&A. And again, to ask questions, you can either type your question in the questions box or chat box, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute your line so you can ask the question. So we have a few questions queued up already. The first one is from Patricia for Anne. So the map that you showed had negative numbers and positive numbers. Does a negative number in the net percent undercount mean the state was overcounted? For example, the net percent undercount is negative 0.36% for one of those states.
Yes, that is correct. So the positive indicates an overcount. And I actually will point out, I apologize to Karuna and my colleagues in Atlanta, but Georgia did experience an undercount of 0.91, and I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Great, thank you. And the next question is for Karuna, and this question is from Caroline. How do we set up an AAPI complete count committee? Is there a template for this?
There's not necessarily a template, but we have a ton of resources as an affiliation that we can share with you. And please feel free to reach out to me as well about how we went about it. But the main thing that I would say is to tap into your current leadership structure in your AAPI ethnic communities. You know, they're not always, our communities aren't always organized to do civic engagement, but they are definitely organized to have cultural events, to have galas, to have events throughout the year that are religious in nature as well. So who are those leaders? Who are making that happen? Who are making sure that like hundreds of people come to, for example, Lunar New Year or Diwali events, right? Those people have reach and they have sway. So you could start with them as well. And then talking to them, you kind of understand like who else has a lot of reach and sway and pull in the community. And then you make the invitation. Going from there, there's a ton of resources that we have that we can offer so that you feel prepared to have that conversation with them. But I think the main thing is like really kind of assessing like who is it that are the trusted messengers in the community that if you talk to them and kind of give them context for census and then they subsequently feel really excited about it and talk about it, will the community listen to them? Will they feel excited about it and fill out the survey? Those are the people that you want to have on your list. So I would start there.
Thanks, Karuna. And another question for you, this is from Anna. How is your organization responding to the U.S. Census Bureau's guidance stating that partners shouldn't go door to door to promote the census or collect information?
That is true. I mean, as community partners, that is not our role to collect census data. Our role is to assist and connect our community with the in-language resources that are available, and that could be from us, from our organizations, from our places of worship, and also from the Census Bureau themselves. We have over-the-phone assistance. We have language guides in 59 languages. So that's our role, is to connect people to those resources. And then, you know, a lot of us are connected to community organizations that have space. They may even have computers, or we have great relationships with the public libraries, which is where a lot of folks will go to utilize the computers. So I think partnering with those spaces or making our own community spaces available for community to come, fill out your form with us. We can help you. We can kind of, you know, show you the in-language guide, which we have printed, right? And do some of that translation as well. But, you know, our role as community advocates is never to fill out the survey for community members or to collect the data ourselves.
And we have a question for Brandon. And the question is from Tracy. Where can people go to get more information about messages and themes that are available in terms of messaging research?
Yeah, definitely. So that should be available on the countusin2020.org website. That will include top-line themes and messages that resonate with specific ethnic groups as well as with specific geographic regions in the country. So we did cross-tab it by those as we collected the information.
Thanks. And you can also look specifically in the Community Engagement and Communications Toolkit. And then there's also a webinar recording on deep dive into messaging. So those are two great resources to look into. And then we have a question about in-language resources. This is from Asya. Will there be any in-language resources available across the Asian languages that we can use? And the answer is yes. So we are producing a series of 12 Get Out the Count fact sheets, and those fact sheets will be translated into 15 Asian languages. And the first of those fact sheets will be released in the fall. And we have a question on questionnaire assistance centers. This is from Irving. So for Anne or Karuna, can you talk more about how the census will support questionnaire assistance centers? Will they be providing tablets or other resources?
So this is Anne. My understanding is that there will not be questionnaire assistance centers supported by the Census Bureau. So in California, the state has actually been encouraging organizations and government sites to serve as questionnaire assistance kiosks or some sort of similar to questionnaire assistance centers, but it won't be the same as what it was in 2010. So the expectation, at least for the folks in California, would be to use the equipment that that folks already have. So as I understand it, the Census Bureau's mobile response initiative will be I believe that if it is staffed by Census Bureau staff, and I will definitely need to look back into this to confirm this information, but if it's staffed by the Census Bureau, then they will be armed with mobile devices because they will be expected to be located in these high traffic areas where they expect hard to count populations to be gathering. But if it's a community organization that is serving as a partner through the partnership program, then my understanding is that they will not be provided with the equipment and that it would be something that they would need to provide on their own. But like I said, I will confirm this.
Thank you. And a question from Crystal. Can CBOs help to fill out the form for clients? What if they do not want to fill out every question? What are the best messages to people without turning them away from the census?
CBOs can definitely help clients or community members understand what the census is asking. It's really important to have the distinction that our role is to explain what the question is asking, but not to tell folks how to fill out the form. And that's very important because we as organizations, right, don't want to put ourselves in that sticky situation where we're doing something that's not legal. So the main thing to understand about, answering the questions is that, people skip questions on the census survey all the time, and they submit the survey and it is counted. So if somebody does skip a question on the census survey and turns it in, it would still be counted. But we do want to let people know that the more questions they skip, the more likely it is that an enumerator would, come to their home or give them a call to fill out the survey. So those are some things that you can tell your clients or community members, so they're better educated about, the mechanics of that. But just keeping in mind that we never want to tell people how to fill out the survey, and we never want to fill out the survey for them.
Thank you. And a question from Jessica is, what are the best strategies to reach out to hard-to-count communities, particularly Asian communities, and encouraging them to care and understand the importance of the census?
Sorry, Bessie, could you say that again?
Yeah, what are the best strategies to reach out to hard-to-count communities, particularly Asian communities, and encouraging them to care about the census and understand the importance of the census?
Well, one of the things that we really stress is that the more that a community member or a community as a whole understands the importance and the impact of census for them personally or as a community, then the more active that they will be and the more likely they are to fill out the survey. I'll just give an example of some meetings that we've had here in Georgia where, community members are hearing from our partnership specialists and data dissemination specialists from the Census Bureau about what are the existing numbers for their communities here in Georgia. And they're really much lower than what the communities themselves understand the numbers to be. And Asian Americans are the fastest growing population here in Georgia. So generally speaking, community members at those meetings get really upset about the low numbers, and they kind of almost feel like this pride around it, right? And a competitive feeling like, no, that's not our number. We're going to we're going to get our number up because we're here. This is our home. We live here. We want to have a power and a say in things. And so that's like one example of how kind of giving context for census in a specific community really gets people gripped and interested, right? And I think once they kind of understand that, once they're gripped, then you can kind of go into the details like, this affects your children. This affects how schools are planned in our communities, how developers plan our communities. This affects funding for health and education. It affects so many different government programs, and it really does impact how much money comes into our state, and those resources affect our daily lives. So you want to kind of find a way to get people interested to see that this impacts them personally, and then share those specific informations about like what the numbers really equate to in our daily lives. And again, we have a lot of information on our website that help kind of explain that correlation between census data and real life resources for our communities. So we really invite you to utilize those.
Thank you. And we have a question from Devana. How are you coordinating efforts with other hard to count communities, including Native American and American Indian, Hispanic and Latino, African Americans, and other communities? Are you collaborating with local government? So I could take the first part of the question. So our affiliation is working as part of the Census Counts campaign, which includes a lot of the national hubs working to create materials and curriculum for a lot of historically undercounted communities. So we are coordinating around materials development, also amplifying each other's messages. And then, Karuna, do you want to take the question about collaboration with local government?
Yeah, I think for our Asian American community in Georgia, I'll just give that case example, right? Is that, our numbers are growing and our power is really growing, and our communities are like newer to the state and to the country. And so participation in government is like a newer thing for our communities, but it really is growing. And I think that like we've been able to work with our coalition members, right, to get them to go to city council meetings where they're talking about forming a census committee, and then be on a part of those complete count committees. We work with our own partners, with local government, to make sure that our communities are understanding and they get a lot of notice about these meetings, and they get the invitations before they kind of, seal up the list of participants. So a lot of our role is to just sort of advocate and make sure that we have participation in those complete count committees. And I would say it's really important because some of them really do have a budget and they are planning to spend money on marketing. And it's unfortunately up to us to really make sure that they understand that those resources do need to be allocated for Asian American Pacific Islander communities, so that we're getting messages in language. And so I think it's not always going to be like a natural go-to for our communities. And so what I think our role is as community advocates is to like create pathways for our community members to get in there. And I hope that answers your question.
This is Anne. I would also like to add to that. So coordination around outreach efforts is really critical. So here in Los Angeles, we actually have a regional census table that has enabled us to identify folks that are doing similar work or work in similar communities with each other. And a lot of that involves doing work outside of the Asian American and NHPI umbrella. So as an example, like Brandon, I'm also a veteran of the 2010 census. And when we were doing, during the non-response follow-up period, where we actually were allowed to do canvassing during that time period, there were some communities that, so as an example, the Koreatown in Los Angeles is, the population in Koreatown is primarily Korean and Latino. And so when people were doing canvassing, they recognized that they needed to team up and partner with folks that spoke the other language that they couldn't speak. And so we had Spanish speakers paired up with Korean speakers so that they could door knock together to make sure that they could hit get all of the apartment units in a building. So I think, what was critical that enabled us to do that was actually all of the meetings the coordinating sessions that we had prior to that point. So we had already been coordinating our efforts around messaging and media work. And so when it got to the time when we were doing non-response follow-up, we had already developed the relationships with these organizations and with these community folks so that we could go into those efforts together.
Thank you. And another question from Tracy on Questionnaire Assistance Center. Are there resources that we can provide to local organizations about how to be a QAC, what they need to know, and what it actually looks like?
Yes, so actually one of the things that we do plan on doing in the future for our efforts in California, and we will share that with our affiliation, is a webinar on how to set up a QAC and things that you should expect, including frequently asked questions. And so that will be upcoming, but because the questionnaire assistance centers will not be likely needed until early next year, we want to basically save that for when people are ready to start implementing that. But that's to be coming soon.
Thanks, Anne. And once information for that webinar comes out, we can also circulate it to everyone who's registered for this webinar. And then a question from Tamir. How many questions are on the census form, Anne?
We got eight questions, right, Anne? And so it asks questions such as like your, a little bit of personal information, your address, of course, and the real focus of the census survey is of the people, the number of people in the households, and it asks those same questions for every person in the household. And so when we think about why our communities are hard to count, one of the reasons is because we don't always count every single person who lives in that household, because it doesn't have to be a family member who's there in the household, and many of our community members have joint households, right? So it's really important that they fill that out, even if it's a newborn. We fill out that survey, those same set of questions for every single person.
Thank you. And we have one question from Caroline on the hard to count map from 2010. And it's a question about what the hard to count map might look like with changes with internet, confusion around the citizenship question, and fear of the Trump administration and ICE. So the question is, I guess, how will that hard to count map differ from what it looked like in 2010?
It's actually very unclear. I mean, I think that what we do know is the states that have high immigrant populations or have high hard to count populations are definitely going to be impacted. And I will say that the transition to an online format is, I know that there's a lot of concerns in California that that's going to have a negative impact on rural communities because of the lack of both internet access and literacy. So right now it's unclear how it will look, but I will say that I am anxious and nervous about this. That's all I will say.
Right, and then a question from Sierra. What actions can we take around counting the homeless population or people without an address?
Well, the Census Bureau does what's called, they'll kind of go out into where groups of people are. And so one of the things that you can do as a census advocate is partner up with your local census office, right? And build those relationships now. And if you know of a location where there's a high population of homeless folks, you can let them know that. And so that will really help them, help inform their operations. So that's one of the things that you can do as they go on to collect the survey.
This is Anne, and I want to also add to that is that so here in California, there has been a lot of coverage around the problems and issues of homelessness among college students. And so one of the ideas that has been kind of thrown around is possibly for the campuses that have food pantries to have information about the census at those spaces. So there are, I think, a lot of different creative ideas that people can come up with to try to get specific segments of the homeless population.
Thank you. It looks like we don't have any further questions at this time. Again, we will send out a recording of this webinar as well as the presentation and contact information for our speakers. So if you find you have questions after the webinar, you can contact us. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to our speakers.